Hello everyone, we continue with Chapter 6, Part 1. Chapter 6. March 1868. We returned to Edo and met up with Nagakura and the rest of our forces at the Hatamoto mansion. Kondou was disconsolate from his first lost battle, more so than most of the captains had expected. Even after he returned to headquarters, he spent most of his time moping. Yoshinobu, the supreme commander of the shogunate army, was ordered out of the imperial court and into house arrest at the Kane temple in Ueno. The imperial court was now in the hands of the Satsuma and the Choshu, and it was becoming painfully clear that the loyalist faction was in a numerically untenable position. Sometime later I was sweeping the entrance when I looked up to see Saito on his way out. "Oh, Saito, are you off to work? Have a good day." When you have a moment," said Saito, "could you make some of your delicious tea and take it to the commander?" Without even waiting for me to respond, he gave a curt nod and was off. Saito had never been talkative, but lately he'd seemed exceptionally taciturn. Perhaps he was still upset over what had happened. Are you guys really leaving?" I asked. "Yeah," said Nagakura. "It wasn't easy, but we've made up our minds. Our path isn't Kondou's. I don't think we can follow him anymore." "Oh, it's going to be lonely here without you. What are you going to do now?" We haven't quite figured that out yet," said Harada. "We'll still be taking it to the Imperial Army. That's not gonna change." "I'm sure you'll be hearing stories in a couple months about how we killed 100 rebels apiece," said Nagakura. "Heck, probably in a couple weeks." "Well, take care," said Harada. "Okay, you too." We'd been so close. It was sad to see them go. Then again, I'd only known them a few years. How sad their departure had to be for Kondou, Hijikata and Saito, who'd known them much, much longer. Okita's condition worsened, and he'd been moved to a separate house in Sendagaya. One by one, our friends from Shie Hall were disappearing. Why had it come to this, I wondered. Cleaning suddenly felt particularly pointless. I decided to go make some tea and see if Hijikata was in his room. "Hijikata, I've brought you some tea." I opened the door as I spoke, and stopped halfway in when I saw Sanan and Heisuke. All three faces were set in hard lines. Whatever I had interrupted, it was serious. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you were in the middle of a meeting." I began to back away as quickly as I could when... "You can stay," said Hijikata. His words froze me in place, but before I could reply, Sanan spoke. You can't possibly be serious about this. Why would you cancel augmentation of the Fury Core? I am serious, said Hijikata. There won't be any more Furies. Make do with what you have. I'm sorry, said Sanan, but I can't support your decision. The Shinsengumi's manpower is at an all-time low. It seems to me that expanding the Fury Core should be a top priority. Heisuke told me that Nagakura and Sarada have left. That's a serious blow to us, Hijikata. Even if we can recruit more warriors, there'll just be more rabble. As soon as they're sent into battle, they'll flee. Wasting our energy on men like that is foolish. Don't you think that it would be better to concentrate our efforts on expanding and improving the Furies? Heisuke looked down at the floor. He'd said nothing since I'd arrived, but it was clear from his face that, fury or not, he didn't always agree with Sanan. You have a point, said Hijikata. If all we want to do is increase our strength, then the fastest way to do that is to focus on the Fury Core. Then why do you, asked Sanan. There's a problem with the Furies, a big one, said Hijikata. We only just found out about it. Our source is reliable. He meant to tell Sanan what he'd learned from Amagiri. The power of a Fury comes from your, I guess you could say, potential. Basically, the more you use it, the shorter your life gets. What? Said Sanan. Sanan's eyes, usually so cool and calculating, went wide as saucers behind his glasses. Yeah, said Hijikata, we shouldn't be using the Furies unless we really have to. The colour had drained from his face. Silence filled the room for several long seconds before Sanan finally raised his head and spoke. Then that is yet another reason why our research should continue. It is a flaw, yes, and a serious one, but with more research we may find a way to circumvent it, or even to counteract it entirely. As a Fury yourself, surely you understand the necessity, said Sanan. Hijikata's expression didn't change. This is not a request, Sanan. This is an order. As your commander, I'm telling you that research on the Furies will stop. There will be no more Furies. Sanan said nothing. Instead, he simply glared at Hijikata as seconds stretched into minutes. Let's go, Sanan, said Todo. He sat unmoving for a few more moments until at last he sagged, defeated, and turned to Heisuke. Very well, said Sanan. Sanan and Heisuke had turned to leave the room when... Kondou, said Todo. What are you doing here? Going somewhere? No, I'm just out for a walk, said Kondou. Just passing by, don't mind me. I heard them exchange a few short pleasantries in the hallway, and then 3 sets of footsteps faded away. The room grew awkwardly silent. Hijikata sighed and let his gaze drift out the window. The tea's cold now. I'll go pour you a new one. I stood to leave, desperate to be away from that room and its stifling atmosphere. No, this is fine. I'm thirsty. Cold tea's perfect. He took a sip and sighed again, quietly, a distant look in his eyes. The workload he'd taken on was tremendous, and he was tired all day, every day, but he looked drained, more so than those things could account for. How hard had Nagakura and Sarada's departure hit him? "He's right about Shinpachi and Sarada leaving," said Hijikata. "That hurt us bad." His voice shook almost imperceptibly, and his mouth curled into a bitter smile as he spoke. "Well, I had a feeling this might happen some day. It's our fault for falling short of what they wanted. If what we're fighting for and what they're looking for aren't the same thing, then why wouldn't they leave? Don't need to let feelings or loyalty tie you down. It's over now, and that's fine. They'll be all right on their own. So will we." I got the feeling that Hijikata's words were more for himself than for me. But damn, we sure have lost a lot of people. Things are different. His eyes were focused on something far away, and his voice had dropped to little more than a mumble. I couldn't even imagine what was going through his head. To be a leader and command the loyalty and obedience of tens or hundreds of men was something I couldn't begin to understand. Every night he worked until the sun came up. It was painful for the furies to be up and about during the daylight hours, but that didn't stop Hijikata. Every day he met with representatives of the shogunate. Even I could see the horrible toll it was taking on his body. What could I do for him? And here we have another choice. I can either tell him to stop or tell him to rest. Well, this is going to be difficult. Obviously, he's not going to rest because he's simply not doing it. He's going to an early grave. He needs to stop, I think. At least Chizuru can try and tell him that. So that's what we'll do, tell him to stop. "Please, Hijikata, you have to stop." His eyes snapped back into focus and swiveled to stare into mine. "What?" His voice was much harder than I'd expected, and it gave me pause. No, I thought to myself, this was something I had to say. "I'm only telling you to do what you told Sanan to do a few minutes ago. Don't use your fury abilities unless it's an emergency." His eyes narrowed. "Why should I listen to you?" Well..." His glare was unnerving. "Well, you became a fury because you were protecting me from Kazama. If you hadn't had to fight a demon, then you'd still be a human now. You wouldn't have had to..." "This again," said Hijikata. "Look, I told you I chose to do this. Nobody forced me. Stop worrying about that stuff." He sounded quite calm and nonchalant, as if he'd already accepted his approaching death. But was that really true, or only an act he'd put on to ease my mind? Who could ever be at peace with bargaining away their life, no matter what sort of power such a bargain might grant them? "When you say things like that, it just makes it worse. If you're in pain, please just say so. Can't you just tell me the truth? Don't you wish you'd never become a fury?" For a moment the room was silent, and then Hijikata began to laugh. And we have another flurry of petals. Man, I just can't win with you, can I? You really are an Edo girl, aren't you? I was rather stunned. Laughter and levity certainly hadn't been the reaction I'd expected. I think I've told you this before, haven't I? Anyway, I'm the youngest kid in my family. They're farmers in Tama. My mum and dad both died when I was still young. That meant my sister, who's about 4 years older than me, had to raise me. You sound kind of like her. Soji's sister Mitsu sounds the same way too. When you go off, it's like I'm getting scolded by my family. Makes me feel like I've got to listen to you. Really? I'd never heard him talk about his childhood like this before. It felt surreal. If what Amagiri told us is true, then so long as I don't use my fury powers, I'll be fine, right? If it gets bad, I'll tell you. Stop worrying about me. He'd likely still keep most of his pain to himself. That was just who he was. But if he really meant that he would tell me when it became unbearable, all right, I understand. I take his word for it this time. So, what will the Shinsengumi be doing now? Well, we're going to need to get Kondou back on his feet first, but after that we plan on heading north. North? He nodded slowly. Right now the shogunate's about as useful as tits on a bull, but we've still got the northeast. If Aizu and Sendai can hold the centre, then we've still got a chance. Dr. Matsumoto is rounding up some men, weapons and ammunition for us at Nagareyama. We'll meet up there, then head to Aizu. Even if the rebels manage to take Edo, they'll probably have to fall back to Kyoto eventually. Once they do that, we can take Edo pretty... Suddenly his body twisted and hunched, and he grasped a hand to his suddenly heaving chest. Ah! Hijikata's eyes bulged from his head in pain, and he'd begun to sweat, hundreds of tiny beads appearing all over his face. Hijikata, what's wrong? He only shook his head, unable to speak through the pain. I'd seen him like this before. Is it the bloodlust? He didn't respond, but I'd known I was right even as I asked. I have another decision. I either give him some blood, give him medicine, or make him endure it. So that is like the previous choice, exactly the same in the situation we had the first time. The obvious course of action is to give him some blood. Hijikata was in pain. I had no other choice. With steady hands I pulled my sword from its scabbard and laid the edge against my fingers, ready to cut. But Hijikata's hand on my wrist stopped me. Why? The pain will go away if you drink blood. I tried to pull away, but he held fast and shook his head. I'll do it. Just sit still. He moved around behind me and loosened my collar. I felt the cool air touch my neck, followed by Hijikata's fingers. He was looking for a place to make the cut. A moment later I felt the kiss of the cold blade against my skin, and then without a sound I felt it sink in. I bit my lip at the pain, but said nothing. Ah! His warm lips touched the cut on my neck, and then I felt his face press against me as he began to drink. Again and again he drank, as thirsty as a man who had been stranded in the desert. I could feel his breath on my skin. It made me shiver. Never before had I been so close to a man. Nerves made my body begin to twist until Hijikata's hands grabbed my shoulders. When he spoke, his voice was low and husky. "Don't turn around." "Okay." I realized suddenly that he didn't want me to see him in his fury state. Those few words, a last strained defense of his wounded pride, tore at my heart, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. For his sake, I did my best to calm my breathing, rapid from nerves and excitement. Though I did my best to hide it, there was no denying that my heart was beating faster and faster. "I'm sorry, I just can't afford to lose it right now," said Hijikata. Was he saying that to convince me or to convince himself? "Of course, I understand." "You don't have to hold back. I want to help in whatever way I can." The day that I'd watched Inoue and Yamazaki die, I'd felt a horrible, torturous regret. There had been nothing I could do for them. Ever since, I'd cursed myself for being unable to help the Shinsengumi after they'd sheltered and protected me for so long. But now at last there was something I could do. I could ease Hijikata's thirst. I felt his grip on me tighten. Emotions washed over me: guilt, disappointment, anger, regret, and I realized they were Hijikata's. His hands were warm. Eventually he let go slowly and stepped away. His breathing had returned to normal, and there was colour in his face again. With the back of his hand he wiped the last of the blood from his lips and sighed with relief. "Sorry for doing that to you." "Oh no, it's nothing. See, the cut's already closed up." I shrugged my collar back up to my neck and smiled. "I'll be staying here for quite a while. So if you ever need me, please just let me know." "You're telling me I can just drink your blood whenever?" "Yes." I nodded, and he gave me a crooked smile. "Shouldn't say things like that, kid. Someone's gonna use you up and throw you away." He was only joking, and I knew it, but there was a part of me that felt if it was Hijikata who used me up, then maybe it wouldn't really be so bad.